The South African Rooivalk attack helicopter flies out for the British Tech Tree in War Thunder as a premium vehicle. Let's check it out. I want to say up front before anything else that I had a really hard time using the Rooivalk effectively in-game, and you're going to see a lot of painful failure in the gameplay footage. I've tried to use clips that accurately represent my experience with this thing, so just keep that in mind. Anyway, the Rooivalk attack helicopter went through 25 years of protracted design and development before it finally entered service, and it started out back in 1984 when South Africa determined that they needed an effective counter to Soviet-made tanks they had encountered on the battlefield. As they were under various arms embargoes, they had no choice but to try and make one themselves. The Atlas Company, and later Denel, used systems from other helicopter designs they had access to as a base for all of the mechanical function and structure, with the first prototype flying in 1990. It had quickly become obvious that the project was a bit too ambitious, and it would take far longer than expected to produce a first-class battlefield attack helicopter without any previous experience. By the time the first batch of production models was delivered in the late 1990s, a fair number of operational problems had arisen, and it was clear that more work needed to be done to iron out all the flaws. Eventually, the upgraded Rooivalk entered service in 2011, with most of the issues being resolved. A total of 12 operational helicopters were produced, a very small number by any standards, and they currently serve exclusively with South Africa, although the design has been bid for a few international projects. What we get in War Thunder is the Rooivalk Mk1F CSH, a premium attack helicopter in Rank 6 of the British Tech Tree at battle rating 10.7. The Rooivalk features a fully advanced weapon system with a great optical zoom, night vision, thermals, and a CCIP for its rockets, as well as an auto-tracker for its chin-mounted cannons and missiles. It also gets a fairly good supply of countermeasures, laser and radar warning receivers, and a missile approach warning system. Now, in terms of weapon selection, the options are a little sparse. One air-to-air missile, one anti-tank missile, and one type of rocket pod, in different combinations if you want. For a built-in gun, the Rooivalk gets a chin-mounted 20mm autocannon with 700 rounds of ammunition. This can slave to the auto-tracker, and it's a pretty effective weapon if you can get it in close. Now, the air-to-air missile it gets is the Mistral. This is a reasonably high-performance, all-aspect infrared weapon with pretty good range and good flare resistance. The warhead's a little light, but it's still usually enough to take out most targets. The anti-tank missile is the ZT-6 Makopa. This is a laser-guided weapon with good range and a decently sized tandem heat warhead with amazing armor penetration. An important caveat is that it's slower than both the Viker and Ataka missiles, so it's usually going to lose long-range jousting contests against Soviet helicopters. Something to keep in mind. The flight performance of the Rooivalk has some caveats. Generally speaking, this isn't as agile as other modern attack helicopters like the Apache or the Mi-28, and its maneuverability is surprisingly sluggish. This is especially pronounced in forward flight, where a lot of the normal maneuvers I use in other helicopters to dump off speed quickly or change direction just don't work here. In particular, the cyclic is a bit weak, and the Rooivalk has a tendency to enter into this unrecoverable barrel roll if you bank further than about 30 or 40 degrees sideways. When I was first flying this thing out, I crashed a lot before I got the feel for that death roll problem, and it's something I really haven't run into with any other modern helicopter in War Thunder. So far, anyway. Now, in terms of flying this into ground battles, there's one important note to say right up front. Do not spawn at the forward airbase spawn location. Just don't do it. It's suicide on most maps at top tier. use the default rear spawn, if for no other reason than to survive longer than 10 seconds after spawning in. Usually, anyway. Now, I also want to be really clear here. I had more of a hard time using this helicopter effectively than any of the others I've flown at any BR, including top-tier matches. I'm not completely sure why. Maybe it's just 2S6 spam, maybe it's a lack of skill with this particular helicopter on my part, maybe it's the matchmaker, maybe it's just bad luck, maybe it's horribly over-tiered. I'm really not sure. If you're considering buying this as a premium to use as close air support, I really want to urge a pretty strong word of caution. The top-tier helicopter meta is really rough, and this thing is going to get shot down before you can even hit a single target at least half of the time. The Mk1F missiles have great range, and it's entirely possible to very carefully linger around 8 or 9 kilometers away from the battlefield and lob these missiles in, and that's basically the helicopter meta at top tier right now. But even then, you're incredibly vulnerable to getting shot down by enemy aircraft and even other helicopters. Part of the problem is that at longer ranges, it can take upwards of 30 seconds or longer for your missile to reach the target. And if you want to have any chance of a hit, you usually have to babysit the missile on its way in, keep the target focused, manually adjust if it ducks behind cover, and so on. All of this reduces your situational awareness since you're tunnel visioned in through your laser targeting. Adding to this, because of the long flight time of the weapon, you'll often find that the target you shoot at gets killed by something else before your missile lands, or it gets behind a hill or an obstacle or something. The weapons on the Rooivalk are quite good individually, but the long distances required to use them effectively make it really hard to actually get kills against anything but stationary campers. Similarly, early game rocket rush tactics don't really work very good with this one, since it's not maneuverable enough for up-close brawling, and even one inexperienced SPAA will be a hard counter within 2 kilometers or so. Now, something this thing is surprisingly good at, and in fact maybe its saving grace, is the PvE battle mode. The long range on its missiles, and its huge supply of those missiles, makes this a really good option if you want to take an afternoon and grind out helicopter PvE battles. The premium bonuses it gets, and the low Silver Lions cost to spawn in it, make it a natural choice for this game mode, and in my opinion, this is probably what it's best at, and it's probably the best way to grind through the British helicopter tree. Visually, the Rooivalk looks a lot like other contemporary attack helicopters, with a stepped cockpit layout, the stub wings, and a reasonably conventional landing gear setup. Personally, I think it looks pretty badass, and the stub wings in particular give it a really menacing look. Landing the Rooivalk is actually a bit difficult. It lumbers a bit close to the ground, and the rear landing wheel seems to be made out of balsa wood, and it breaks off basically no matter how you land this thing. I don't know if that's a glitch or a feature. In hover mode, this one is kinda tricky to set down, so it's probably worth practicing a bit in test flights, just in case you have to make a damaged landing to repair or something, and you don't end up crashing out. To close out on the Rooivalk Mk1F CSH. This helicopter has a great weapons system, with all the features you'd expect from a modern attack helicopter. It can carry a huge load of very capable long-range weapons. It's got an adequate supply of countermeasures, and it gets premium RP bonuses. However, it's not as maneuverable as other high-tier helicopters. Its missiles are slower than competitive counterparts. Its low maneuverability makes it difficult to fly at low altitude, which is kind of where you need to be. And frankly, it just gets shot down a lot in the current top-tier meta. The final verdict on the Rooivalk is that this can be a pretty effective grinder in the helicopter PvE battle mode, but players buying this as a premium who are new to the top-tier helicopter meta are going to have a really difficult time using it effectively in ground battles as close air support. As always, thanks for watching.